Welcome everyone. We are learning the laws of Nedarim, the laws of vows and Shavuot oaths. And the question which we're going to ask ourselves right at the beginning is, should one make an oath or a vow? Should one do that, or should one be trying to avoid them? The Gemara, which has a whole tractate which deals with it called Masechet Nedarim, on Daf Tet, asked this very question. And the Gemara quotes a pasuk from Kohelet. And Kohelet says, Tov asher lo tidor, mishetidor velo teshalem. What does the pasuk say? It is better that you should not vow than you should vow and not pay. Now, how do we understand that verse? Says the Gemara, Tov mizeh umizeh, better than both of these positions is she'eno noder kol ikar, divrei Rabbi Meir. What's the best thing that one can do? Don't make a vow at all. That's the position of Rabbi Meir. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says, Tov mizeh umizeh. You know what's better than those first two mentioned in the pasuk? Is noder meshalem, someone who makes the vow and completes their vow. So here's the question. If vows are so difficult to do properly, should I not do them? Or should I be careful about doing them? Because if I really do complete them properly, then I have done something very powerful. According to Rabbi Meir, not only does Kohelet recommend not vowing if one does not fulfill it, but he also recommends not vowing even if one will fulfill it. Why? It's possible that at some point one will not fulfill one of his vows. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda, on the other hand, holds that it is only best not to vow if you cannot fulfill it. But if you can, then one should and is in fact encouraged to vow. How does the Shulchan Aruch rule on this? He seems to side with the approach of Rabbi Meir and says that one ideally should not take Nedarim regularly. He then uses quite harsh language to describe someone who does vow even if he fulfills it. Have a look here. It says, Al tehi ragil menedarim, don't be frequent, don't be accustomed to do vows. Kol hanodeh apa pishe mekaimo, and even someone who vows and fulfills their vow, nikra rasha v'nikra chote. That person is called a wicked person and even called a sinner, which is fundamentally challenging. How could it be that if I'm taking a vow, I am I'm being a sinner? If we look at the laws of Nezirut, in Parshat Naso, it's the 6th chapter of Bamidbar. It says there that what type of korbanot does a Nazir bring? He brings a korban chatat, he brings a sin offering. And so therefore there is an interpretation here that even though one is doing good, by making that which is permitted asur, prohibiting that which one is allowed to do, is by definition not a pious act, but an act which is negative, because by overly limiting yourself, you're going to be unable to live that type of lifestyle. Davar acher, alternatively, by living such a lifestyle, one will become resentful of such a lifestyle. So even if one does it, it becomes problematic, hence these concerns of someone becoming a choteh or a rasha. Lehavdil, to differentiate today, there are many mitzvot in the Torah which are hard to keep. But there are, worse than that, because that we all have to do, worse than that, there are minhagim, which some people do, which when they do them, they create a negativity around them. And that negativity challenges the whole nature, so that although you succeed in doing your vow, you create a negativity by how you keep that vow. For example, not a vow per se, someone who puts his children through Jewish education, but bemoans the cost of that Jewish education. Or someone who keeps Shabbat, and Shabbat we have to keep, so it's not one of those where it's a vow, but someone who keeps Shabbat but complains about keeping Shabbat, what a drag it is. Or someone who complains about keeping kashrut. By complaining about what one is doing, creates a negativity around it. So the danger. So when it comes to mitzvot, we all know the mitzvot that we have to do. When it comes to nedarim, when it comes to making vows, one could create a negativity around it, which as such, Shulchan Aruch Maran says that that person could be even considered a rasha or choteh, even if they fulfill their vow. Carries on Shulchan Aruch and says, "Sarich lizaher shelo yidor shum davar." A person should be careful never to take a vow. Va'afilu tzedakah ein tov lidor. And even when it comes to giving charity, one should not make a vow. Ela im yeshno biyado, unless he has it in his wallet, that person has it in their wallet, yiten miyad, then he should give the money straight away. Ve'im lav, and if the person does not have those finances, lo yidor, that person should not vow ad sheyelo, until he has that money. Ve'im poskim tzedakah, tzarich lifsoki mahem yomar bli neder. And if he is designating tzedakah and needs to designate an amount, he should say that he is doing so bli neder or belo neder, without a vow. Now this is a very important thing here of how we give tzedakah. If we give tzedakah to teva, or we make a pledge to a big financial campaign, that one should do so with the lashon, with the language of beli neder, or with the knowledge that they have the money in their bank accounts, or that they have a generated income, that they know month to month to month, they know they're always going to be able to pay something. Because someone who makes a vow with no knowledge of what they have, they're creating a situation which is going to be untenable and be very difficult to bear. Hopefully there's no one on here who's in charge of making donations. Oh, I do that. Got to be careful with that. You don't say that one too loudly, but in truth, it's there. One should not be creating a situation where you are impoverishing someone or making someone make a vow which you know that they would be unable to keep, or put them into financial jeopardy. Carrying on, it is clear from the passage in the Shalah HaKodesh, though, that one may not commit to a certain action or make a promise and then not intend to fulfill it simply because one stated belo neder or bli neder. Rather, a person must try to fulfill everything that they say. So it says here, he shall not break his pledge. He must carry out all that has crossed his lips. It would seem that the words, he must carry out all that has crossed his lips, are superfluous. Rather, it is a rebuke of Musar, that a person should be faithful in his word and fulfill what emerges from his lips, even if it was not said in the form of a vow, and he was not verbally obligated. And this is a superior trait, and this is how a person should act both concerning matters of life and death, as well as monetary matters. He must carry out all that has crossed his lips, that his yes is true and that his no is true. And this is important, that hen tzedek v'lav tzedek, that we are trustworthy, that what we say is what we do. And here's a small biography of the Shalah HaKodesh, Rabbi Yeshayahu Horowitz. Okay, read that later. Rav Moshe Sternbach writes that one must keep his word in committing to perform a mitzvah, even if one said bli neder, unless he has a good reason for not doing so. And he writes, according to this, it would seem that even if one says bli neder concerning a mitzvah matter, one must fulfill his word. since every mitzvah becomes obligated to fulfill when committing to it verbally, as it is stated with your mouth. This refers to tzedakah. But since there is no prohibition violated in him not fulfilling his word, if there is a reason, one may nullify it, as he did not intend for it to take effect in this case. But without a reason, since one committed to give tzedakah or a devar mitzvah, one certainly must fulfill his word. Aval nireh, but it seems, de'al kol panim, that in any case, ein ze chiyuv gamur ketzedakah, it is not a complete obligation like charity. V'rak begedei hishtadlut, and is only in the category of what one should strive to do. And so therefore, we're trying to get into the situation of, and we're going to get this a little bit further on in the class, what we're going to do when we make a neder, and perhaps that neder, that vow that we've made, is struggling. When does Hatarat Nedarim apply? Now we're going to discuss the situation which used to happen a lot, especially in the times of Tanakh, but certainly was something which went on for a long time in Jewish history, which is when you make a neder during a time of distress. We're on page 317, and despite the general recommendation of not taking vows, there are certain times that it's permitted, and some say even encouraged. One of these times is an et sarah, a time of distress. As we know that Yaakov Avinu took a neder when he ran away from Esav. So too, anyone may do likewise in a time of need. Tosafot in Chulin takes this approach that it is permitted to take a neder in the time of need. And it says as follows: V'im tomar v'hakativ v'yido Yaakov neder uchtiv asher nadarti ashalema. So I have these two psukim. Then Yaakov took a vow, and that which I have vowed I will fulfill. V'yesh lomar. So the question is, how can I do that if we said already that taking vows is not possibly the ideal? Yesh lomar de b'sha'at tzara shareh. At a difficult time, at a time of distress, it is permitted. Like we said in Bereshit Rabbah, Vayida Yaakov neder, and Yaakov made a vow, saying, lemor ledorot, saying to the generations, Shiyu Nedarim b'shat tzara, that one should make vows at a time of distress. The Ritva agrees that it is permitted to take a neder in such a situation, and he adds two other examples where all agree it's permitted. And he says, and vows to consecrate for the Bet HaMikdash, which are for kapara, atonement, or of a mitzvah in order to encourage oneself, or at a time of distress. All those three things are permitted lechatchila udivrei hakol hi, and this is true according to all. Although Tosafot write that it is merely permitted to vow during an et sarah, the Piskei Teshuvot and the Shiltei Giborim state that it is even a mitzvah to take on a neder. So not just it's a good thing, it's a mitzvah. Mitzvah lindor b'shat sarah. It's a mitzvah to vow in a time of distress. The Shiltei Giborim says as follows: Umiu nireh the neder et sarah dachmor b'hu rabbanan batrai hu mishum de mitzvah yesh b'neder zer. Why were the rabbis so stringent about this? Because there is a mitzvah in taking such a vow when it is to do with an et sarah, time of distress. The Aruch HaShulchan states that although Tosafot used the word permitted, they too mean that it is a mitzvah, like the Piskei Teshuvot and Shiltei Giborim. You can have a look at that there. It's a little lengthy, so we'll skip that for now. Others hold, though, that it's forbidden to vow even in a time of distress, as implied by the Shita Mekubetzet and the Rashba. And they say, V'ha dichtiv vayido Yaakov neder. How is it that Yaakov could have made a neder? Kodem matan Torah hava deleket takala. It was before the giving of the Torah, And there were no pitfalls, i.e., if he did not fulfill the vow, so there was no commandment to do so. So Shita Mekubetza says, no, one shouldn't make a vow, not any time, and certainly not at a time of need. And the Rashba says also, and in this manner, we can answer that which it states that one may vow in time of distress, as Yaakov did, since that vow was not a complete vow, but rather a nedava, a gift, as an expression of hakarat hatov and hada'ah, an expression of thanks. However, the Shulchan Aruch rules like those who permitted it, and they say, and he writes, bet tzara mutar lindor. He doesn't say it's a mitzvah, but he says it is permitted to take such a vow. The Yakut Yosef notes, in addition, that one should try not to perform Hatarat Nedarim on such a vow. When it comes to doing a neder when it's a difficult time, one should try not to do annulment of such a vow. Hanoder be'et tzara, yesh omrim she'ein lahatin nidro ela letzorch mitzvah or letzorch gadol. One should not annul this vow unless there is a great need. V'im yesh safek b'lashon haneder, but if there was a doubtful language, if the vow actually took on effect at all, then one could get out of it. Other types of vows that may be permitted include, which is known as nidrei zeuzin, vows of encouragement, whereby one takes a neder that he will learn a specific section of Torah or fulfill a mitzvah in order to encourage himself to do so. According to the Gemara, these two would be permitted. Nevertheless, the Chochmat Adam cautions against doing this in case he's unable to fulfill it. Today, it seems the prevalent custom concerning these types of issues is to refrain from taking a full neder, but rather committing so by saying beli neder, without a vow. Now, is accepting a minhag, a custom, considered like taking on a vow? So as we mentioned before, today we try to avoid taking on an actual vow or oath, even when it is technically permitted, and instead declare that any such commitment be bili neder, without a vow. So what happens if someone made such a commitment to accept a particular custom or to learn a specific Torah subject without saying the words bili neder? It seems from the Gemara Nedarim that even such an acceptance is treated as if one has vowed. As it says here, Devarim hamutarin, regarding things which are permitted, va'acherim nahagu behen isur, and others are accustomed to observe them in prohibition, I ata rashai lahatiran bifnehem. One is not permitted. One may not permit these matters before these people. Why? Shneimar, as the verse states, Lo yachel devaro, he shall not profane his words. He should not make his words chol. If they contravene their custom, they are in violation of the prohibition, he shall not profane his words. It seems from here that the Gemara Psachim, that the reason for this halacha is the concern that exists that if one permitted to simply cease the custom, one may also come to permit other matters that are truly forbidden to him based upon nedarim taken. And the Ran appears to adopt this understanding as well. And he says, so the one does not treat real vows in a light-hearted manner. Here too, since they were accustomed to observe a prohibition about a matter that is permitted, it is considered like a matter that is forbidden for them. From here, Rabbi Yehuda HaKohen would say that if a person was accustomed to not eating meat or drinking wine at a specific time, and then wished to drink wine or eat meat at that time, he requires permission, tzarich heteh, which is hatarat nedarim. So for example, in my home, we have an unwritten rule, which isn't done in a form of a vow, to generally not to eat much meat or drink much wine during the week. Not chicken, not meat, not wine, not anything like that. However, we don't do so in the form of a neder because there are occasions occasionally where we would have chicken or meat. Could be a leftover on a Sunday. It could be a simcha during the week. It could be that one didn't expect. And so therefore one can avoid that situation because one never made it as such as a religious vow. It could be trying to make the world better. It could be a form of Rav Kookian vegetarianism. However it is, one is not doing so in the way that it makes it into a vow formation. Because if it was in the formation of a vow, one would require Hatarat Nedarim, which we're going to see later on. The Shulchan Aruch adopts this principle that customs accepted above and beyond the strict halacha have the status of a neder, and hatara, annulling them is required if one wishes to cease observing it. Although the Shulchan Aruch uses the example of the Gemara that deals with a custom to refrain from a certain activity, it would seem the same applies to a similar custom of a positive nature. So it says here, Devarim hamutarim, regarding permitted things, mutarim, and everyone knows that they're permitted. Nagu bahem yisur, and some have the custom to treat them as a prohibition. Have keilu kiblum alehem beneder ve'asur lahatiram bahem. It is considered as if they accepted them upon themselves as a vow, and it's forbidden to permit them to perform those without doing a hatara. Hilkach, therefore, mishur agil hit anot ta'aniyot shilifnei Rosh Hashanah, those who are accustomed to fasts before Rosh Hashanah, between Rosh Hashanah and Kippur, or someone who has the custom not to eat meat or to drink wine from the Rosh Chodesh Av until Tisha B'Av, or from the 17th of Tammuz. Interesting there that he codifies that as a, we all think of that as straight halakha. This is a minhag where we are forbidding that which is permitted. And he wants to retract from that behavior because it's not healthy, or he is not healthy, I should say. He requires 3 people to stand in a Beit Din, to sit in Beit Din and to annul his vow. And if he had in mind to do this behavior, to do so forever, even if he only did it once, he requires hatara. He may then broach the vow with regret, by saying that he regrets having observed the custom as a vow. Okay? Now let's have a look at the type of acceptance that is binding, because this is very important to us to see what is the difference between I do something without expressing it, without thinking of it, and retroactively it looks like it's a vow, compared to someone who, even if they've only done it 1 or 2 times, but they express it in a language that makes it a vow, even if their behavior does not. The Mishnah Berurah says, Ayen Yoreh De'ah, have a look in Yoreh De'ah, chapter 214. The Mashmasham, from there it seems, the minhag shel mitzvah shenaseh keneder, whoever does a mitzvah that has the status of a vow, hu rak kasher hurgal ba, it's just something that he is accustomed to, or afilu pam achat, or even did it once, v'chashav v'sham ma'aseh shinhog ken olam, but at the time that he made the vow, the action, he said, I want to do this forever. He made that commitment. But if it's not these, but otherwise, it does not have the status of a vow through performing it even once. Okay? So what is the halacha if one mistakenly thought that the practice one accepted was an obligation? But in reality, it's optional. Is such an acceptance considered like taking a vow as well? Tosafot claims that it is not, based on a Yerushalmi. Therefore, one would not be required to abstain from such a practice in front of those who are stringent about it, and one who does practice it would be permitted to cease the practice after discovering that it is not forbidden, even without the Hatarat Nedarim, as it says as follows here. But matters that were practiced due to an error, that one thought that they were actually forbidden, but they are permitted, one may permit it before them, and this is apparent from the Yerushalmi as well. And before you all get into the question about kitniot or other things which people do thinking that they were actual chametz, we're going to see that a little later, and it's a lot more complicated because it's something which wasn't taken on by individuals or families. It's something which was taken on by entire Ashkenazic communities in Ashkenazic countries. But we'll see that because I can tell that some of you are thinking about that. On the other hand, the Ran disagrees and holds that even if one mistakenly thought that the particular practice was forbidden or obligatory, it is still binding upon them as a neder to ensure that people do not come to be lenient in other cases where the neder, where the vows are actually binding. As he says here, but here we are referring to permitted matters, and others were accustomed to observe it as a prohibition, and they thought that it was forbidden according to the halacha. And in this case, we say that a person is not allowed to permit it in the presence of those who are not students of Torah. Why? Since they will extend it and compare one matter to another and be lenient on certain matters mistakenly. But a Torah scholar who resides in that city may privately follow the permissive position in his home. And this also includes if the parents treated something permitted as being forbidden due to offense around the prohibition, and their children who are not students of Torah believe that it's halachically forbidden, one should not reveal it by telling them it is only forbidden due to custom. So they will not be lenient about it. The Shulchan Aruch and Ramah both rule in accordance with Tosfot that acceptance of a custom is only treated as a neder when the person was aware that the reaction is technically permitted. However, the Shulchan Aruch does mention the opinion of the Ran as a yesh omrim. And as it says as follows, aval hanohagim isur b'davarim hamutzarim, someone who practices a prohibition on something which is permitted, machmat shesovrim shehem asurim, because he thought that they were prohibited. It's as if they never took on that vow, and therefore they don't need to require Hatarat Nedarim. V'yesh mishomer, but there are also those who say, she'im to'eh v'nahag isur b'davar mutar, if someone erred and behaved in a prohibition, something believing that it was prohibited, that which is permitted, nish'al umatirim lo b'shlosha, he still requires 3 people to annul his vow, because we treat it like Hatarat Nedarim. And the Ramah says, v'minhag kasvari shona, the normal custom is to follow the first position around customs. Don't enjoy the irony there. Irony there that the law is that the custom is like the first position around customs. Now, we will conclude this section by noting that after seeing the potential complications in accepting the fulfillment of a worthy practice, halachic stringency or custom can entail, one can easily understand why it is recommended to always state that one is doing something, b'li neder, to avoid questions. And this is mentioned by the Shulchan Aruch. Lefichach, therefore, הרוצה לנהוג בקצת דברים המותרים לסייג ופרישות, יאמר בתחילת הנהגתו שאינו מקבל עליו כן בנדר, וגם יאמר שאין בדעתו לנהוג כן, אלא בפעם ההוא או בפעמים שיוצא ולא לעולם. Therefore, one who wishes to practice, i.e. to avoid some actions that are permitted as offense, as a matter of aestheticism, should state at the start of his practice that he is not accepting it upon himself as a vow. And he should also say that he intended to do so only that time or at the times that he wants, but not permanently. Okay? I'm going to pause right now before we go into how to do Hatarat Nedarim, the annulment of vows. Does anyone have any comments or questions at this time? Okay, so I'm going to jump back in And it says here, Hatarat Nedarim. In cases where one took a neder or accepted a custom or stringent practice in a manner that was binding, there is a way to absolve oneself of the obligation to fulfill it, known as Hatarat Nedarim, the permitting or releasing of vows. And the Mishnah notes, though, that the notion of Hatarat Nedarim is not mentioned anywhere in the Torah. Heter Nedarim, prochin be'avir. It's floating in the air. Ve'ein lahem al ma yismochu. And there is nothing for it to rely on. So it's an interesting compilation, formation here of the halacha, that there's nothing to support it. Normally I'd hope that there's some psukim in the Torah, a word or something, but it's saying this concept of annulling vows, it's just, it's the oral Torah, but there's nothing in the written Torah to substantiate it. The Gemara then presents the opinions of the other Tanaim who do give allusions in the Torah. As it says in Tanya, Rabbi Eliezer says, Yesh lo ma yismochu. No, they do indeed have that which to rely on. As it says, Ki yafli. When a person shall clearly utter a vow, Ki yafli means shtei pamim. Achat hafla'a le'isur, achat hafla'a leheter. When a man shall clearly utter a vow, and when either man or woman shall clearly utter a vow, i.e. the words clearly utter appear twice. One is for prohibition, i.e. when one states intention to accept the vow, and one is for dissolution, lahatir, to permit it. Rabbi Yoshua says, Yesh lo ma yismochu is another verse why I have that which to rely on. It says, Asher nishbati be'api, wherefore I swore in my anger. Be'api nishbati, in my anger I took the oath. V'chozreini bi, and I retracted. Okay, so again, it's not specifically in the text, but I could make a drasha on the pasuk to make that. Rabbi Yitzchak says, Yesh lo ma yismochu, why do we have that rely on? It says, Kol nediv libo, whoever's heart's desire, let him bring it, implying that when his heart regrets, he can retract. Chananya ben Achi, Rabbi Shuameh, Yesh lo ma yismochu, that rely on, as it says, Nishbati bakayema lishmo mishpatei sidkecha. Okay, which says there, I have made an oath and I fulfilled it to observe your righteous ordinances, which implies that some oaths need to be fulfilled, but there are others there are those oaths which are fulfilled, there are others which are not, because they are annulled. And then number hey, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Mashmuel, I'avai hatam Amar lahu. Didi adifa mididichu shene'amar lo yachel devaro. Hu eno mechel, aval acherim mechelin lo. Amar Rava, lekulhu itlahu pircha, leva midishmuel the late lay pircha. What does it say at the end here? If I had been there, sitting with those sages, I would have said to them, my raya is better than yours. Why? He shall not nullify his word, from which it may be inferred. He himself cannot nullify his word. However, others may nullify it for him. Okay? A prisoner cannot get themselves out of prison, but he could be broken out. Rava said, for all of the suggested sources for the dissolution of vows, there is a possible refutation, except for that of Shmuel, for which there is no refutation. Okay. Specifying the neder. Although unlike other halachot of nedarim, Hatarat Nedarim is not mentioned in the Torah explicitly, there are nevertheless numerous details related to its proper performance, a few of which we will discuss here. The Gemara in Gittin cites a machloket amoraim, whether one performing Hatarat Nedarim must specify the neder that he wishes to annul. Ibayeh lehu, they asked, Tzarich lefaret et haneder, do I need to give the details? Or eno sarich, or do I not need to? Rav Nachman Amar, eno sarich, one does not need to. And Rav Papa Amar, tzarich, no, you do need to. Although the Gemara does not determine which of these opinions is accepted in halacha, many Rishonim, including the Rashba and the Rosh, rule that one must detail the neder, and if one does not, the hatara is not valid. As Rashba says here, v'lo ifshita, and if it's not explained, resolved, miu kaimalan de tzarich, we establish that one needs to say what it is. Afilu b'diavad eno mitar, and even after the fact, it would not work unless one specified. Whereas other Rishonim, such as the Shita Mekubetzet, hold that if one does not specify the neder, the hatara is still valid b'diavad, and so therefore would rely on the position of Rav Nachman. Okay, so lechatchila, they would say, halacha is what? Like Rav Papa, that you need to say the halacha. Helchatak Rav Papa. Miu davka lechatchila hu tzarich lefrot. Specifically, ideally, one needs to give the detail. The and the wise person cannot annul the vow until he specifies what he wants annulling. Aval, but in the avad hitira below prata neder, if he made the vow, the vow was annulled without him specifying what it was for, harize mutar, it's still permitted, it would still work. And the Shulchan Aruch rules in accordance with the most stringent opinion and adds that one must also specify the reason. So here, thank you very much, Shita Mekubetza, you didn't make it into Shulchan Aruch. Not only do you need to explain what you vowed, you need to tell me why you vowed it. Kodem shiyatiu lo, before a hacham can release a person from a vow, the person needs to give the detail of the vow, and the reason for why the person made the vow. But if he did not detail it out, then there is no annulment. Mihu. But when he details it to even one of those sages, then it is permitted. So, what is the mechanism? How do we do this hatara? We need to have charata, which is regret of making that neder, and we have to have a petach, where one declares that he considered some specific factor at the time of the neder, which had he known, he never would have made the neder initially. The Gemara Nedarim records a machloket as to whether the first option of charata is in fact a valid method of performing Hatzarat Nedarim. Is charata enough, or is it only because the petach is involved? So here, the Gemara says in source 31, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rabasi. Rabbi Yehuda said the name of Rabasi. En hacham rashai lehatir. A halachic authority cannot dissolve the vow, ela ke'en abba nedarim halalu, except for these 4 vows. Kasavar. What does it mean? That it was not included to be a vow at all, but it was simply expressed in the language of a vow. In addition, he can dissolve a vow taken by mistake. And the Gemara comments, it can be derived from here that he holds that a halachic authority does not broach dissolution based on charata, based on regret. Ein potchin b'charata. Whereas Rav Yehuda Sava, potchin b'charata. No, we can absolve a vow because of regret. Dehahu da'ata lekamed Rav Huna, because of the one that came in front of Rav Huna, Amarle, he would say to him, Libech alech? Is your heart upon you? I.e., do you still have the same desire that you had when you made the vow? Amarle, lo. If the person said no, Sharieh, he would admittedly permit them, he would dissolve them of the vow that they made. So here we see a big machloket between Rav Asi and Rav Huna. For Rav Asi, charata, regret is not enough. I need to say that I didn't realize what I was getting myself in for. Whereas Rav Huna, no, it's enough to say I was hot-blooded, I was jumping in where angels fear to tread, and that would be enough to get it. The Ran explains the reasoning behind the first opinion, that one should not use charata as a method of hatara, as being that it is not clear from his regrets alone that the vow was undertaken in error. As perhaps he regretted the neder later, but not when he took it. You can have a look at that in there. The Shulchan Aruch rules that either method of petach or charata is valid. So thankfully, Baruch Hashem, we can either have a petach where I didn't realize what I was getting myself in for, or charata. I just regret that I made it. But the charata must be complete regret that he took the vow, not regret experienced later. He says here, one who regrets the vow itself does not require a petach. Rather, the sage should ask him, do you desire to have this vow be valid? And he answers, I do not want it, and I regret that I took the vow. Eno chafetz bo, umitcharet ani shenadarti. And he dissolves it. But he must regret the vow itself, that he would wish that he never vowed it in the first place. But if he says that he regrets it now, but until now he did desire the vow he made, that is not considered charata, as the vow must be uprooted from its inception. Sheyakor haneder meikaro. And the one who took the vow must be careful not to say that he regrets it from the outset, unless it's clear to him that he would have wished not to ever have vowed, as otherwise the dissolution is not really a hatara, and he remains with the prohibition of this vow being in effect all of his days. But if he does not regret it, he, the hacham, must find a way to broach it by saying, had you known this matter, ilu hayita yodea devazeh, lo hayta noder, would you have really made the vow? By that way, you are causing the vow to be uprooted from its inception. The custom today is not to rely on charata alone, due to the possibility that perhaps the person does not truly regret having taken the vow from the outset. Likewise, the custom today is not to rely on a petach alone, since there are numerous details associated with it, and not every factor is given the status of a valid petach. Instead, the Ramah states that the custom is to use the charata as a form of petach. In other words, the person explains why he regrets having taken the vow. And then the Hacham asks him, had you known that you would regret it, would you have made it? He then answers that he would not have taken it, and his vow can then be annulled. In this manner, we ensure that the charata is complete and that a valid petach has also been created. As it says here, v'nagu lahachmir la'asok min hacharata petach, shelacha shomesh mitcharet mikara, אומרים לו, אילו ידעת שתתחרט כלום נדרת, והוא אומר לו, אז מתירים לו. And the custom is to be stringent and to create an opening based on the regrets. That after he says that he regrets from the outset, we say to him, and had you known that you would regret it, would you have taken the vow on at all? And he says no, then we can release him. The Shach explains further that his expression of regret that he ever took the vow is effective in permitting it, since he states that had he known he would regret it, he never would have vowed in the first place. Therefore, the vow is entirely uprooted. And then we release him, meaning that we release him even without another opening. But with regret with charata alone, after turning the regret into a petach. And the reason is that there is no longer concern that perhaps he is not an expert concerning this charata, and perhaps he did wish to maintain the neder until now. And even though he says he has charata, it's not true. Nevertheless, since he says that had he known that he would later have charata, he would not have made the neder. If so, the neder is uprooted from the inception. Ne'ekah haneder mi'ikaro, and one does not need another opening, don't need another petach, and this is sufficient. V'hacheh sageh. Now, who can perform Hatarat Nedarim? The Gemara in Masechet Nedarim Ayin Chet Amud Aleph gives us two opinions. Either you have a Hacham, or you have three people who are regular Jews. Okay? The Shulchan Aruch also rules that one sage can perform Hatarat Nedarim alone. Misha Nadar, v'nit charet, someone who made a vow and had charata, regretted it. Yesh takana yedei charata. One can resolve it through charata. Afilu neder belohei Yisrael. And even you vowed by using God's name. Ketzad yaseh. How should he do it? Yelech etzel hacham mumche. He has to go to an expert judge, someone whose specific role is in annulling vows. The Gamir Usavi, who is learned and wise. And I'm very happy to say I'm not at that level. But today, since we don't really have those types of scholars, we don't do it that way. Because we say, Im ein yachid mumche, and if there is not one person like this, yelech etzel shlosha jotot, you go in front of 3 regulars. You don't even need to go in front of 3 rabbis. V'ha'idna, and today, ein mumche, there are no real experts, sheyeh ra'ui lahatir biyachid, who can really annul a vow for one being the only person. So therefore, even in Batei Din, we do this, even with experts. We have 3 judges, or even, but it could work even with 3 regular individuals. And Sarah Carson says here, "Im ein yachid mumche, yelech etzel shlosha yotot, hu degemire lahu v'savire, v'gam yodim liftoach lo petach v'yatiru lo." Provided that these 3 individuals, they shouldn't be totally ignorant. They need to be learned and can reason, and they know how to broach an opening for him and can permit the vow. The Shach explains at the very least they must be able to understand the relevant concepts explained to them, and you can see that there in source number 40 where it says mashma she'enser shiu savrei heter. They don't have to be really skilled in this area of Jewish law. And they need to understand it a little bit. And I would say that now, after this class, all of you would be able to do this. Now, what is the difference between Hatarat Nedarim and other cases of the Bet Din? Although Dayanim for regular cases heard in the Bet Din are not allowed to be relatives of the contestants, it is permitted for relatives of the one seeking to receive Hatarah to serve as Dayanim for Hatarat Nedarim, or even for 2 of the Dayanim or relatives of each other. It says here, Amalei Abaye, Kevan desfirola afilu me'umad, afilu bekrovim, afilu balayla, lo mitchazeh kedina. This is so different from regular Beit Din because it can be done while they're standing up. They can be relatives. It can even be done at nighttime, which are things which are not allowed to be done by Beit Din. Beit Din must be done sitting down, must be during the day. They cannot be relatives. So therefore, it is permitted. The Rambam codifies this as the halacha. He says, "Hakrovim ksherim lahatir nedarim shvuot she'en haheter hazeh din." Relatives are bound for permitting vows and oaths, for the release is not considered a ma'isa bet din. It's not considered an action of a bet din. So, Shulchan Aruch, how do we do it? Ketzad hu hi ha'atara. How is it done? Yomar lo shalosh pe'amim. He should say, or the Dayan says to him 3 times, mutar lach, mutar lach, mutar lach, or sharuya lach, sharui lach, sharui lach, or machul lach, machul lach, machul lach. It is permitted to you, it is released to you, it is forgiven for you. B'chol lashon sheyomar afilu me'umad, and they can do it if they are standing, if they're krovim, if it's balayla, or even if it's Shabbat. Okay? אפילו אם היה אפשר לו מאתמול לשאול עליו, בלבד שיהיה לצורך השבת, כגון שנדר שלא לאכול או לבטל מעונג השבת. And you could even do it on Shabbat if it has something to do with Shabbat. For example, where they said they weren't going to eat meat and it's Shabbat coming, or they said they didn't want to have any oneg Shabbat, and it's Shabbat, you can annul such vows. Okay? Although we said that they can be relatives, there is one area here. Women cannot serve on this type of Beit Din, okay? Sebechinuch says it has to be done by males, but not by females, because they are not fit to annul vows. Okay, and Rabbi Akiva Eger explains why that is the case. He says, in my humble opinion, a woman may not permit vows. Why? Where the disqualification is not inherent in him, as it is, he is suitable for judging one who is not his relative. Likewise, at night, since the night is the cause and there is no disqualification in the person. The same is true for a child, that it seems, in my humble opinion, the child is disqualified to judge. Whereas with the males who are over bar mitzvah, they are fit for judgment if they're sitting, if they're not related, and if it's during the daytime. That's not true of women and minors. For women and minors, they're not fit for judgment at all, and so therefore they cannot do Hatarat Nedarim. That's according to Rabbi Akiva Eiger and according to the Sefer HaChinuch. Can one send a messenger to perform the Hatzara? Okay, well, in most areas of halacha, an individual can appoint a shaliach. Does this work here? Regarding to Hatarat Nedarim, the one who vowed must approach the Beit Din himself to ask for release from his neder. As the Rambam says, "Ve'eno oseh shaliach lihisha'el lo al nidro." One cannot send a shaliach to release him from his vow. The Shulchan Aruch codifies that as well. Tzarich hanoder lavo lefnei hamatirin. The one who made the vow needs to come in front of the Beit Din to have it annulled. But the Pitchei Tshuva says, b'sha'at dachak, in extenuating circumstances, one could even be lenient there and allow that. What about a wife? Would she be allowed to send her husband to form the Hatzara for her? And this is often happens for Hatarat Nedarim before Rosh Hashanah, before Kippur. Here it says, Ravina Habala Nadra Ledebitu. Ravina's wife had taken a vow, and she wanted to have it dissolved. Atala Kamed Ravashe. Ravina came before Ravashi. Amalei, and he said to him, Ba'a Maushi Aseh Sheliach Lecharatat Ishto. What is the halacha in regard to whether a husband can become an agent to express his wife's charata? Amalei, im mechanfin in ilo lo. If three people who can dissolve the vow were already assembled, then yes. If they're not already assembled, no. A husband cannot serve as a shaliach to express his wife's regret to the court. Now, this is the ruling given by the Shulchan Aruch, which says, "Abagav damrinan le'el de'ein adam yachol lasot shila lehashil al nidro, bal shaneh di'ishto kegufo dameh." We say here that a regular person cannot have a shaliach, but a husband can serve for his wife, provided that Beit Din was established for other people's vows to be assembled. We can't do it especially for the women. Thus, it will seem it is permitted for a husband to perform Hatarat Nedarim for his wife before Rosh Hashanah, since he did not gather Dayanim together. They were already gathered in the synagogue for everyone else who was having their vows annulled. And this is the conclusion of many poskim, including Rav Moshe Sternbach in source 51. In contrast, the Sefer Kal Nidre reports that some contemporary poskim hold that there is no custom for women to appoint their husbands to perform Hatarat Nedarim for them. So he doesn't like that Gemara. I'm not sure why. And he says that women should rely upon the Hatarat Nedarim when they're in synagogue for Kal Nidre or Kol Nidre, as many people call it. The declaration permitting the neder. Once the petach or charata, or the combination of petach and charata, are expressed clearly, the Dayanim declare the neder to be dissolved using the language given by the commentaries, such as the Rambam. As we just said there, shruyalach, mutalach, or machulach. It is permitted to you, it is released for you, it is absolved for you, or any similar language. The Yakut Yosef points out that Dayanim need only make this declaration once, but the minhag is to say it 3 times. Mutalach, mutalach, mutalach is how we say it. Hatarat Nedarim on Erev Rosh Hashanah. Have a look what the Shalah says there. And what does the Shalah say? Many of the halachot that we have discussed here apply there as well. So there's permission to have relative serve as the Dayanim, or to Hatzara at night. However, other halachot do not appear to be followed in the same matter. in the same manner. For example, one does not specify any Nedarim or customs adopted within the standard text used, even though we mentioned above that one must normally specify the vow for which one is requiring Hatara. Nevertheless, the Sefer Derech Chaim writes that the generic text is not effective for Nedarim, that one remembers and one can specify. And this is very important. I tell this to people. When it comes to Hatarat Nedarim on Erev Rosh Hashanah and Erev Kippur, it's just stam things which we're not sure about. But if you have something specific that you should do with 3 regular Jews, it's not something you should do when including it with the general populace before Rosh Hashanah, before Kippur. He says as follows: what is customarily recited at Hatarat Nedarim? Though according to the law, the one seeking release must specify the vow, but please know, my teachers, that it is impossible to specify them since there are many. This is only effective for vows that were forgotten. But vows that he did not forget and he remembers them and needs to absolve them, he should specifically specify them. And if he does not, then they do not release him. So that's what I'm saying. If you're really coming to get rid of something which is really bothering you, you need to do so on your own. Okay, and you can find this also, this concept in the Tosafot Read in source 57. Okay. Let's skip a little bit of this. All right. Performing Hatarat Nedarim for a custom. How do we do it? I want to skip to the practical side of this. We go a little bit further. No, that's not what I'm looking for. A little bit further. No, you know what? It's not what I'm looking for. I'm sorry. I lost my place a little bit. I'm just looking for something. All right, here we go. We're going to get to this real point here. We've got a few minutes to wrap this up, and it's the end of the entire unit. I don't want to leave 5 minutes hanging or 10 minutes hanging for the next thing. And that is what happens when your parents or family have a custom that you can no longer do or no longer wish to do. For example, not to travel on Friday, okay? The family has the parents have a custom not to travel on Friday, and they weren't allowed to change it. Why? Because the Torah says, "Al titosh torati mecha," do not depart from the Torah of your mother, and so therefore, and Shma benin musar avicha, and listen to the rebuke of your father. I.e., that would say you have to keep your ancestral customs. The Shulchan Aruch says about this, the acceptance of the public, chala alehem al zar'am, takes effect upon them and their children, even for matters that the people of the city did not consent to accept together, but are accustomed to doing so on their own as a fence or a protection for the Torah. Similarly, those who come from outside the city to live there are considered like the people of the city and are obligated to follow their enactments. So therefore, I have this issue, which is my parents or my ancestors have a custom, could be something very hard to do, eating kidneyot perhaps, okay? One cannot, while living in the same city or the same country, change that position. However, we may see that moving country, especially to Eretz Yisrael, might change that. Also, people who move to a city where everyone keeps that, am I forced to keep that position? I want to skip through this a little bit. Rav Moshe Feinstein notes that in many places today, there are not so many communal customs anymore, and often conflicting customs are practiced in the same community. Therefore, Rav Moshe suggests that one should follow his family customs, okay? And that's true. For example, Seattle, you can't say that there is one custom because we have Ashkenazic customs, we have Sephardic customs, and so therefore we can't say that. And that's certainly true in communities like in New York, where you have different sects, where they all have different minhagim. The one says, I'm keeping my family minhag as opposed to any positions out there. So concerning weddings during the days of Sefirah, here in New York and Brooklyn, where people have moved from many other places that have divergent customs, that every person should follow the custom of the place from where he comes, since it's like two religious courts in one city, in which case there is no problem of not splitting into groups. Normally there's a concern of lotit godedu, that I don't want to split into subgroups. But here, it's already the reality. You have a divergence. It's not everyone here. It's not like an ancient European town where everyone has the same minhag. Rather, everyone's coming from different cities and moving to one city. They're establishing it. So I no longer have the concern that I am breaking off from the community. And Rav Jachter observes that if we accept the approach of Rav Moshe, there may be many family customs that have the status of communal customs, and all poskim would agree that one cannot change or abolish it in many situations. However, and here's the real thing, which is, let's say someone has this custom, for example, kitniot. Many poskim have said there's no way for Ashkenazim to get out of kitniot. However, there is one way which they've said to do it, which is when an Ashkenazic woman gets married and she's living in Eretz Yisrael, she can say that I am now doing Hatarat Nedarim, and there are some rabbis who say they can do that. Now I want to put my hands up and say, even that, there are still many rabbis on both the Ashkenazic and Sephardic sides. Hacham Ovadia Yosef specifically says, Ashkenazic men, Ashkenazic women, move to Israel, don't move to Israel. You're out of luck. That is a paretz geder that you cannot get out of. However, others say no. That was something which was binding on the lands of Ashkenaz. And since we've now moved to Israel, that is a way that once you get married or once you've established yourself, that you can, in fact, do Hatarat Nedarim. This now concludes this unit and concludes volume 6.